This is Divya speaking. Thank you very much, Jerry, for your kind and compassionate consideration. It really touched me. And again, I'm so honored that you are all here. I really can't even find the right words to express how I feel about this. I'm so grateful to all of you for your support, for coming here and learning about deafblindness and learning about how you can recognize how to self-advocate and have self-determination. And internalize that information so that you can spread that to the world. I want to show you throughout your own country that you can do it as well. I also want to take a moment to thank Bobbin. I'm so honored that you are here as a big brother and a mentor. Professional issues aside, you are my brother, and you have shown me how to empower myself through the years and truly given me a way to get through my journey as well as a deafblind person. And now you've truly shown your support by coming here to Mumbai. Thank you so very much for coming here today. I can't find the right words to express what that means to me. And how grateful I am that you came here to support me as my brother. Thank you so much. Now I want to talk a little bit about myself and how I learned about self-advocacy and self-determination and my journey as a deafblind person. The type of deafblindness that I had is called Usher Syndrome. I have Usher's swing beat. It is an extremely rare form of low vision. There are only 4 people with that particular type of vision loss. So that primarily is what affects my vision. There might be more with HARS3B around the world, and we're not sure. There might be some people here in India with that. So that is another one of the reasons why genetic testing is so important, to make sure that we can find that information about Usher syndrome, just like Jerry mentioned. So I was born in Canada. I was born deaf. But my vision loss started at about 3 or 4 years of age. I communicated with my family in the past just the same way that many of you do. I would point to things and use my body language to get my message across, to be able to communicate with family members, to let them know what I wanted. I had no idea about sign language at that time. And that was until I was about 3 or 4 years old. Then we found out that I had some vision loss. I was slowly developing, how we found that was I was slowly developing a lesion in my spine, and they took me to the doctor. My parents took me to the doctor, and we did some testing to figure out what was going on. And at that time, we discovered that what they thought I had was Usher Syndrome 1. They had not yet diagnosed that as HARSB. They were assuming that my vision had some issues, and they made some assumptions about what those were. But what they found was that it didn't quite match what I was experiencing. So at that time, I was considered more low vision. Just like many of you here in the audience need to either stand up so that I can be seen clearly, or sit closely to me so that you can see me clearly. That was the way that my vision looked initially. But then the tunnel vision had not started yet at that point. I had not started to lose my peripheral. Communication to my family was primarily through pointing. There was not a complete communication. At approximately 7 years old, I was trying to read for school, and I was using gestures to try to figure out ASL. At that time, I started learning my alphabet and learning more and more American Sign Language. And as I learned that basic sign language, at approximately 5 years old, I only knew about a couple of different signs. We use American Sign Language in Canada, and that's where I started learning. But then my family moved to America, and everybody started signing at me so fast, I had no idea what they were saying. I was still learning and reading about it. Then I ended up going to the Florida School for the Deaf and the Blind when I was 7 years old. And there I learned how I was able to get through that process as a deaf-blind person. Now, the challenge with that school is that there's a school for the deaf and a school for the blind, and they are separate schools. And I was somewhere in the middle. So for the school for the deaf, I was being taught sign language and how to operate as a deaf person. The school for the blind, I was being taught Braille and how to operate as a blind person. And I was pulled in both directions. And there was a lot of conflict between those two methods of teaching for me. And at that point in time, I was terrified. I did not know how to advocate for myself, the same as many of you. I was exactly like you. My parents tended to control me and make decisions for me and tell me what to do. And how I learned to start advocating for myself and empowering myself was going to deaf-blind camp, and I started learning some of the basics of being a deaf-blind person. And then later, I met Bobbin at Helen Keller National Center. So I'm going to show you through some performance. You guys are going to laugh. I'm going to show you a little performance here. So I went to New York with a friend. We were traveling together. I was feeling homesick and that sort of thing. I saw several deaf-blind students there, the same as me. We started learning how to communicate with each other. And I started asking, hey, are there any other Indian deaf-blind people? And somebody said, oh yeah, there's one of the teachers here who is deaf-blind. You're going to meet him, and that'll be great. I was really excited, couldn't wait to meet him. I was like, up until I was 7 years old, I had not met another Indian deaf-blind person. And it was Bobbin. So I went into the technology classroom, and I met him, and we had an interpreter, Vic, who was interpreting tactily. I got ready, and I sat next to him, and of course I was significantly shorter at the time. And I was doing some reading through Braille and asking him some questions about being deaf-blind. And through tactile communication, we talked a lot, and Bobbin explained a lot of things to me about that life. And I will never forget that technology lesson. I was like, wait, forget the technology, put that to the side for a second. I want to talk to you about life. Give me some information about how can I learn how to cook? Do you cook for yourself? And he said, yeah, of course. Well, you're deaf-blind. How can you type? How can you send messages across to other people? I was just fascinated with his story and his experience. And I felt like we truly were empathetic and understood each other. And he could ask me tons of questions. And just really quickly, we developed that connection. And I was able to understand what that deaf-blind life could be for Pete. We sat together and talked about those days for hours, just chatted, not worried about teaching. And then I went to another class. It was a cooking class. Just getting some interpreting clarification. I went to a cooking class, and that instructor, I asked the instructor in the cooking class, I told them, hey, I'd like to be able to, I wanted to be able to make samosas. And I asked this instructor, and they had no idea how. They tried to explain it to me. I was explaining to them what a samosa is and how it's made, but I didn't know how to do that myself as a deaf-blind person. But they were an American person, and they couldn't explain that to me, how a samosa was made in ASL. So I went to Bobbin myself, and I went the first time to communicate with him just directly without an interpreter because I was trying to be empowered like he was. And I asked him, how can I make a samosa? How am I going to do this on my own? And he explained the process to me. I need a little wine. And he showed me how to cook it. And I tasted it. It wasn't great. It wasn't the same as, actual Indian food that mom makes for me at home. But we had that connection, and it really showed me how I could be empowered. And every time that I needed something, I was able to go to him and talk to him and have him explain to me that it was going to be okay. And he started to help me develop the skills that I needed. I spent 2 weeks in New York, and then the friend that I traveled with left town. She flew home, and I was there by myself. I'm here by myself in this town? What am I going to do? I was really anxious about that. I was like, I'm going to have to fly home alone by myself for the first time? And I'm sure Bob remembers this story. I was really thinking about, how am I going to communicate with people? How am I going to get on the airplane by myself?
Very good.
And so he helped me develop a plan. And I went and talked to some of my family members and let them know the kind of assistance I was going to need. And my aunt came and helped me get everything set up. I arrived at the airport. I met the ticket agent at the counter, and I used to communicate paper and pencil to write back and forth to tell the ticket agent what I needed. We went through I told the TSA agent that I was not going to be able to do the pat down, and that because of my cochlear implant, I would not be able to do the scanner to get through security. So the communication was not great with that TSA agent, unfortunately, but I was able to get through, and I was able to get on the plane. And the flight attendant was gesturing with me to act out what I needed to do to make sure I was ready for takeoff, fastening my seatbelt and getting my seat back put up. So when it was time for us to land, at about 2 hours through, I was communicating with the flight attendants, and they let me know that it was time. And I finally got home, and I was so relieved that I was able to do that on my own. I got through that travel independently as a deafblind person. I felt so empowered that I could actually do that on my own. So for the next flight, the next time I had to fly, I told my parents, "No, you don't have to come with me to the airport. I got this. I can do this." I said, I know my way around this process now. I have my cane. I have my communication cards. I can let people know how to help me get through TSA. And my parents were absolutely flabbergasted at the idea that I could do that myself. And it really did increase my confidence and also increased my skill set, showing me what I was able to do and say that I can do this. And that's where that started for me. So I went back to school, and that really, again, did truly empower me to be able to go back to school. And at that time, I started learning how, again, Florida School for the Deaf and Blind, I was pulled in 2 different directions. And in the deaf school, they would talk to me about identity, things that I had to do in the education I had to have as a deaf person, how I had to communicate. And in the blind school, they gave me training about how to use a cane and how I had to communicate as a blind person. And there was really a struggle about that. And what ended up happening for me, how I got through that, was I ended up entering a beauty pageant at the school. I wanted to show my ability. I wanted to show my belief and my confidence in myself and my own empowerment, and that I was able to be optimistic and succeed through those difficulties. And I was able to do a dance performance during that pageant. I did not have an interpreter to support me or communicate with me during that time. We had the contestants all up on the stage, and so the interpreter would let me know. I didn't really have anybody to let me know when it was time for me to go on. I was able to hear some of the music that let me know when it was my turn to get up and dance, but I had practiced that at home, learning the different parts of the music and what they felt like. And I could see that was going to be something I could use. I used that during my performance and ended up winning the pageant. So I went through 10th and 11th grade. I also got best performance. And I was able to see how I could overcome those situations. And I entered the pageant both of those years and improved my skills. And then as a senior, I actually won. And at that time, I was the first deafblind person in the history of the school to win that pageant. And that was such a confidence builder. That confidence was so important to show people in the audience as well that you don't need to pity me as a deafblind person. I can do it. I will succeed. If I'm having issues with access, I would find a way through that process. There are ways available. I take a hold of different opportunities and use them to my advantage. The only thing that I really wanted was to, as I was empowered, to help empower other people. And I really am just so amazed at the response that I've received. People saying, wow, you're deafblind and you're still able to do this? It's just people are amazed at me. And they didn't expect that I would be able to do it. They doubted it. And I knew in my core that I was able to do these things. And that makes it possible. So what you can do is at this point, you really have to understand and know who you are, right down into your soul. Whatever your hobbies are, whatever your desires are, whatever your hopes are, those things empowered me and made me be successful, having that trust in myself. And again, going back to the deaf and blind school, there was that struggle between the two identities. When I graduated with a special diploma. I was like, okay, that's great. I wasn't really happy about that, though. I was like, no, I can graduate. The challenge is that the educational system decided for me what type of diploma I could have. But education itself is so critical. I really did expect that in the future, other schools would try to oppress me and tell me what I couldn't do, how I would not be able to succeed. Where it caused just for a moment.
Sorry, I'm coming a little late. I came in a little late.
Yeah, for breaking isn't having for all the man and everything.
So he's also a deafblind person, but he cannot see the speaker in board. Can we like sit in the Fred if you don't mind?
We're going to take a moment to rearrange so that everyone has access to the communication.
Would we read this? I need also request the title at about the side is little slower.
Not.
Thank you so much.
Oh, else? What plot?
Take range. Out exactly.
Out. And do check. Three much good finders.
Yes. Yes.
All right.
Yeah.
Is everyone in position? We're good? Okay.
We're fine.
This is Divya speaking again.
That's nothing happened.
I graduated with a special diploma, and I was not happy about that. I put on a happy face, but I was not happy about that. Because education is absolutely critical to me. That did not make me happy that I was not graduating with a regular diploma. I started thinking about how I could communicate so that I could take advantage of a higher education because I would need an education to get a job and be successful. Everything that had to do with my future was going to be tied to my education. And the educational staff at the school really were saying that they doubted that I could do this. Deaf and you're blind, how are you going to succeed? And I thought, well, what can I do about that?
But we're nimble enough and make a print salt.
The staff were astonished.
The education staff were doubting if she could succeed.
Not clutching in. But, well, I think at the end of the meeting, I'm sorry. But,
It also got with.
well, just keep it great and start it. We need to do with that at a time.
We're just doing some interpretation adjustment.
How to get it? Let's start that. We'll lift our good to my head. That. Why they and but because of the problem that I was about that I heard over there. Go ahead, Dad. It's the game correct.
That set up with this thing. I said I had to command
The steam to Paul. Perhaps and should the opening at the bed against the party. The morning is given up never has been played. You can only I with a comprehend. No, out down the bed. The top of the south tastes like a rain now. Why did that blue? That's a net. Then I heard the gold comparison true.
All right, we're ready to start back up again?
still wondering if that's
It will proceed to switch. So, thank you.
Incredible and about that guy.
taste
Next.
some about it and
Here we go. I put the energy and the master. Thank you. Let's in the burner notice. We thought we had a tip to bring it. Protect for the bag and I thought, why? Yeah. T-shirt and doors. I thought he did it. Wow. Meter and thinking it up. Is cheap up. I'll pay for it. It's by that done Steve and how about the pole? They had it. Talk to the good. It's hard. It's so iconic, but that ain't itself the pop words. I mean, that is, I hear it. From her of how water that the both of the airs. That's definitely it. The time in the fight.
Just a moment.
And just have to that's icon. Loading to the router.
We're just taking a moment to clarify positioning so that everyone has access.
about think about what you need to like
How did it go after it? Like, well, during the
hand you as I
the hair up the band,
This is Divya speaking again. I knew that education would be so important to me as a deaf-blind person. I felt oppressed by people telling me that I would not be able to succeed. And I thought about that, and it was demoralizing. I thought, no way. It is time for me to advocate for myself and confront that issue and speak up. So what I did was I approached it very politely and then said, okay, we need to have a meeting with my parents, my family, my educators, my administrators, and we all got together and I spoke up. I let people know my goals. And I said, I need to advocate and show the truth of who I am and what I want and what my goals are. I'm not going to allow people to tell me I can't. I can, and I'm going to speak up and prove that and do that for myself. I was going to be able to be self-determined and have that self-determination. that is me making those decisions and taking that power back for myself. And that I stepped up and I said, I am going to make my own decisions. I'm going to transfer out of this state school. I'm not going to stay here. And I left and moved to a different school. So we had that meeting and discussed everything. And I started studying the history of in science and everything. I started studying history and science and learning things at school and getting accessibility to those items for myself. I was able to communicate and advocate for myself and speak to my teachers and let them know what different accommodations and accessibility issues I was dealing with so that I was able to study. And I went through and studied all my courses and passed all of my courses. They told me that I was going to have to take 4 years to graduate. And what ended up happening was that I graduated in 2.5 years. The teachers were absolutely shocked. They could not imagine a world where a deaf-blind person had their own capability of being able to graduate in 2.5 years. And they were questioning how that was even possible. And I told them, that is because of my confidence in myself, my expectation for myself, my faith in myself, my motivation and my desire to succeed for myself. And that is how I was able to succeed and graduate in 2.5 years. And I thought, finally, I did it. That was part of the mountain I had to climb. Those were the steps I had to take. But it starts with an individual step and small successes. And then you're able to get to the mountaintop and reach the goals that you had in your own mind and heart. You know what you can do, and you have to climb that ladder. And it is so empowering to be a self-advocate and to be self-determined and to make those decisions and have that faith in myself and that self-esteem. My favorite quote that I use so often is that talk about self-esteem and self-determination. I went through the same issue in college. My college story aside, the point of that was that I became involved in deafblind organizations. For example, the Deafblind Youth Adult Association, DBYAA. And what that is a group of young leaders who are deafblind, who are helping to educate at the government level and advocate for education and accessibility in everyday life, as well as in educational scenarios, travel scenarios, medical, employment, getting support service personnel, and all the different areas where we need to make those accommodations. So I worked with that organization, and myself and my team, we were able to get involved in a trip that went to Washington, D.C. in the United States. We were meeting with government leaders there. And then I, myself, as Divya, I started contacting the teacher and I said, we would really, really like to meet President Obama. Is that possible, please? And you guys know, President Obama was a busy guy. We were saying, how could we go about that? The instructor was like, I'm not even sure how to do that. And I said, you know what? You have to stay positive. And I trusted in that process and that we would be able to make that happen. We're just getting some clarification of the spelling of President Obama's name. for the interpreters.
It's hot. Go on. Go in your coat. Fake head. Big on. Fist to toe. Move. Dirty. Off right there. In the truth. Clean. Cold. Him chakra. Happy. And they get better. Great. All right. Look. Fine. That's a better shape.
We're ready to go ahead and continue.
Okay.
Crap. And all I could do was think positively and trust in myself and know that that was something that was going to happen. I was not willing to give up.
Into the go thought. And clicked. Probably.
So we got a phone call, and they asked us if we wanted to meet President Obama. And I said, yes, that was going to be a dream come true. I said, yes, I knew it was going to happen.
Good.
I was so excited to meet President Obama. It was a thrilling experience for me. We went into the White House and were able to take a tour and see all the different things in the White House. And then we walked into the room, and there stood President Obama, extraordinarily a lot taller than me. And I was standing next to him in a line of other people who were there to meet him, and had looked up at him, and he looked down at me. And we were able to have some conversation and chat together a little bit. And I reached out and gave him a great big hug. I was just so inspired and thrilled. I had stars in my eyes. I was absolutely beyond thrilled. It was overwhelming. Because that, President Obama is a leader. And what he gave me was that knowledge of how accessibility for the deafblind community can make such huge changes. And he's in a position to teach America and the world what that can do. And I developed that affinity for him as a role model to get involved in so many activities at school and organizations. And I was able to continue being involved in the deafblind community and letting that effect it had on me ripple out, giving presentations and teaching family members, teaching educators, all the things that a deafblind person can do. Sometimes it takes those baby steps at the beginning. And that time came about because of what I went through. When I was ready to graduate college, I included that story about how I was able to become assertive and motivated and proactive and make those decisions for myself so that I was able to succeed in college as well and graduate from college. And that just gave such a boost to my self-esteem, my self-confidence, the skills that I was able to add to my tool set, and how to become a successful person. As time went on, I was able to become an advocacy specialist at Orlando City Hall. So I work in the accessibility department for the city of Orlando, Florida in the U.S., advocating for people with disabilities, for how buildings themselves should be set up to be accessible physically, medical accessibility, those types of things. I do education in that scenario. But then COVID actually ended up impacting me significantly. I wasn't able to work. I wasn't able to create that accessibility. I had been able to, at that time, get a daily job where I went to work every day. And I went through that for a year. And I knew that I could be successful at that, and I was successful at that. But then COVID hit, and I thought, wow, it was disheartening to not be able to go to work. I was not able to stay at work. I had to stay at home, isolated, bored out of my mind, like everybody else. I had to find some other way to keep myself busy. So I started getting involved again in different organizations like the Usher Syndrome Coalition. And I had to develop new dreams and new goals to continue on my journey. But I keep working for that progress. I was not willing to sit in the house alone by myself, being depressed and saying, well, I'm not going to have any money. I don't know what I'm going to eat. I had to get rid of that kind of thinking and become assertive and start looking for things that I could do to keep myself active, like sewing, dancing, cooking, finding different kinds of training to do things I wanted to do so that I'd be able to live my everyday life. There's other ways that I can become successful. So now, today, this event, this trip here to Mumbai, this is the other goal that I had. Complete with grandma. And it's been really successful. The flight here, for example, I was able to communicate with the staff. And I just felt, now I look out and see all of you here in this room. And this is what I came here for. After this time, I'm going to be traveling to Nepal and doing education and outreach in Nepal as well. And what I hope is that all of you will be able to show your abilities and your successes. You know what you have inside you, and you know who you are. You have your own things. Family, school, and other people might try to take over for you and run your life. You need to let them know to allow you to take care of your own dreams, to let you do it. Even just something as simple as learning how to fold your own clothes. My parents, when they were teaching me to fold my own clothes, when I started out, I didn't know how to do it. My mom had to stand there and model it for me. And I practiced and practiced and got through that process and developed that skill of being able to fold my own clothes. And then at the age of 8, my mom started teaching me not at the age of 8. Later on, my mom started teaching me how to cook. I learned how to wash my own clothes in the washing machine. I learned how to sort my clothes by color. Those skills are important to show your friends and your family members so that they can recognize that deaf, blind people do have skills for daily life. And that will let them know that you can live an independent daily life as long as you develop those skills and have them to work with.
It's a character book too.
So, for example, my grandfather asked me if I wanted some milk. I was like, no, I want juice. I want some mango juice. That's what I want, I think. And my grandfather said, nope. You're going to drink milk. It'll make you strong. And this is a hard time. You'll grow strong. And mango juice will not make you grow strong. And no, you can't have that. Do you want to be strong? Do you want to grow up basic strong? I said, okay, fine.
Did that.
So my grandfather gave me a glass of milk and was like, go on, drink it, come on. So I just kind of held it up to my face, and I didn't really want to drink it. But he was following along with me. He's like, all right, come on, take a drink, take a sip. And I drank it all the way down. And he said, see? That communication with my grandfather was so important, and it was confident.
Still dark and be messenger.
And I had to really understand, at that time, it wasn't sign language we were using. We were using body language and gesturing to get that information across. And he was able to help me. My family was also able to help me.
How's that?
We didn't really have a lot of options for communication.
What's that?
So, there wasn't a lot of typing involved. We might have to call an interpreter to come and sit down and discuss several different topics.
Practice the water.
But once those communication tools are developed, you can develop those connections with your family, with your community, and that ripples out. One person alone has a really hard time being successful. You need one type of communication alone makes it difficult to be successful. You need all these different tools in your toolbox. For example, learning how to communicate with someone through gestural language or other sign languages. We can type messages back and forth. We might need to call an interpreter in.
Look at the hut.
My sister, for example, is a very skilled signer. In Canada, we've used some ASL, but we also used a lot of home signs. And we included all of that in our communication as a family. That communication piece is so key, so critical.
I'm going to leave now.
If one thing doesn't work, you have to start looking for other options. So I really do encourage all of you to have your own journey so that you can become successful and make that work for yourself. Who you are, your desires, your dreams, your confidence. We will be here to help you learn how you can become a self-advocate, how you can become self-determined, and gain the training that you need. Just taking that very first step is important. It's just like a flower. You have to find the seed and plant it. Cover it with dirt. Give it some water. That is the beginning step of growing a beautiful flower. You have to give that time to develop, and you see that over time. The flower shows up later. You have to plant the seed first. And I will be honest with you, I trust that you can succeed.